Hi, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk Off the Podium. I have a friend. I've known Evan for about 7 years. We met about 7 years ago, I think, or maybe it was less than that. But Evan Macarello is with me. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Tigran.
How long has it been? I think we met in about, was it 6 years ago, or is it
It
less?
was, yeah, at least that.
Yeah,
We were together at some kind of
conducting.
masterclass
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
and it was like an immediate good feeling. So that it's really great to share some time with you today.
Yeah, it's great. So what have you been up to recently with the pandemic and everything happening? Musically, what have you been doing? And also non-musically, maybe hobbies that you've picked up during this time?
Yeah, it's been wild,
Yeah.
as it has been for everyone. The first thing that I really started doing differently was I sort of became an unintentional video creator
Oh, wow.
because my work is freelance with three different orchestras that meet on a weekly basis. And in lieu of rehearsals, I ended up making videos for each of them in different ways so far. I counted the other week, and since the pandemic, I had made 17
Wow.
videos for my different ensembles, ranging from a more casual lecture demonstration talk about the music we were rehearsing to heavily edited and produced educational content from my youth orchestra. So that's been the most surprising turn in my career as a musician and conductor that came out of this was learning all the ways that I can reach people through video.
Hmm. Wow, that's amazing. So programming, you work with so many different orchestras, and this is something to think about because when you work with the professional orchestra, the ideas and the approach to programming is completely different from when you work with the community orchestra. And community orchestra at times could be very different from a youth orchestra. And the list goes on. The college orchestra has a different approach. Of course, these are a little bit of a generalization, but the approach is different because the season is different. Some orchestras have 3 concerts, some have 6 or 7, and then you get to really major professional orchestras, they have 100 or something. What's your approach, and how do you program for the orchestras that you work with currently?
Yes, you touched on a number of big challenges with the different kinds of people we make music with. And I'm always attempting to program, even for an orchestra that has only, say, it's a 2 concerts or 3 concerts a year. I'm always trying to craft something of a dialogue and a connection or a buildup of knowledge in an educational situation over multiple programs. So, for example, with my youth orchestra, I am always thinking on a 2 to 4 year track because I assume that on average I'll have the kids in my group 2 to 4 years each, and so I want to make sure that their experience while they're with me is encompassing something that is representative of what great orchestra music can be in all these different ways. So I'm striving in programming for, at least for educational and for community orchestras, this idea of what are we building up over time in terms of the player's experience. That's really important to me to think about. And so, like, are we doing, we just had a Beethoven year, right? But Beethoven is one little slice of the canon, and so it's important to make sure that especially younger people in high school are realizing that we have all these great American composers that are from very near us. In the last 2 years, we did with my group in Connecticut, Amy Beach's Gaelic Symphony,
Yeah.
and we had a premiere of a violin concerto written for us. So I'm working very hard to help the students in those kinds of groups understand that not only is classical music alive, but it happens very near them geographically,
Yeah.
as well as being something that is inspired by these places far away and long ago.
Yeah. speaking of American, I know that you do a lot of research before we got on, and actually we connected because you wanted to talk about Hovannes, Alan Hovannes, so we spoke a little bit off record. But speaking of American composers, what are some composers that you've discovered over your time researching and thinking about American composers?
Yeah, it's been really wonderful to chat with you a little before this about Alan Hovannes. And Hovannes's music is somewhat unknown and only known for really one or two pieces that are generally considered curiosities, I think. But I've found that his sense of spirituality and the cosmic connection to the universe in his music is going to be valuable for some of my orchestras this coming year. Prior to the pandemic started, I had been looking at music of Florence Price and was very excited to be diving in to some of that. And I've recently picked up the new book by scholar Ray Linda Brown on Florence Price, which in this pandemic I've had the opportunity to read really in depth. And I think her music is incredibly inspiring, and it's wonderful to see all kinds of different folks. Mitchell McCarthy was the composer I mentioned before that my youth orchestra works. I wanted to make sure I at least said his name.
Yeah.
So I've been on this journey of discovery, specifically about Florence Price and composers like Margaret Bonds and William Grant Still, because I feel that I've been robbed of my own education and heritage as an American for not having learned more about different composers from our own country.
Yeah.
So that's been an important journey for me that is I'm still very much on the road toward.
New composers, living composers, have you done any collaborations recently? And also, well, you've done them, but what are some names that you're willing to share, and maybe even some pieces that you really enjoyed working on or listening to?
Yeah, I actually run my own radio show over the air on a low power station here in Rochester called Sound Space, where I'm playing contemporary music for an hour. We've been on a hiatus because of the pandemic, but I hope to get back to it soon. So I'm very engaged in listening to all kinds of people. I'm so grateful that we had this recent project with Mitchell McCarthy's violin concerto that is now in that piece that we commissioned is now in plans for performances in New York with other orchestras on the coming season. Adriana Matteo, the violinist, and I have worked together to make that happen. And there's been people and pieces that I've been able to uplift through one of my other groups, the Hochstein Alumni Orchestra. I worked most recently with Cy Reynolds, who is an LA-based composer, and he wrote a wonderful piece for the 100th anniversary of the Hochstein School that our orchestra premiered last January. And I have another commission in the works for next year's annual concert with the Hochstein alumni from another alumnus of the Hochstein School, Jonathan Madden. So part of my mission with that orchestra in particular has been to uplift these folks who went through the school here in Rochester, New York, and to say, look at some of the, not only the terrific players that come back to play, but these folks that are writing music for orchestra.
Wow, that's amazing. What's your approach when you get in? I'm sure as a conductor, you also get scores and pieces that are sent to you, or your curiosity, you're just interested in programming piece that you've never programmed before, or someone who's unknown. What's your approach? What do? You look at a score, you listen to the music. What grabs your attention? What's a good piece for Evan to program on a season? What gets your attention?
That's a challenging question, because as you know, being a tremendous conductor yourself, like the craft of absorbing printed scores into your musical mind is a time consuming and serious one. And so I take it very seriously when people send me music. And because of that, it often means that the backlog is long because I do want to actually look at the score,
Yeah.
So being able to look at the score and to ask myself, is this, in my case, it's usually one of the first questions is this playable for my orchestra?
Yeah.
I do work with professionals, but on a more ad hoc basis. I don't have a permanent position. So very often I'm looking at, can this be achieved by a community ensemble? Can
Yeah.
this be achieved? I mean, it's one of those very unfortunately practical things that go into my considerations. But I'm very inspired by music that is about things that are all over the map. I like music that from a variety of styles, from the craziest avant-garde noise to something that's written in a 4-part traditional Western harmonic scheme. I don't have a particular axe to grind, stylistically. There's things that speak to me, and I from all of these tributaries that we have currently in music. I'm afraid it's not a very good answer.
No, it's good. It's good.
I definitely take it very seriously, and I try to make an earnest effort to say, what's this piece's story?
Yeah.
What's this person's, and the person's story is important too, but especially if I'm being sent a work or 1 or 2 works, it's what is the story of this music? I think.
A couple more questions. I recently had some conductors on the podcast, and I've been talking to them about these things. One is memorization. Do you memorize and conduct? And also, if you don't, or if you do on occasion, how do you mark your scores? Are you a conductor that really marks up the score, or do you just kind of look at it over time? You study the score a lot, and you don't need to mark it up as much. What's your approach?
I do conduct from memory sometimes. I think it's very valuable because there becomes a point for some pieces where I am at a knowledge level and absorption and connection to the piece, right? Because it's also a bit of the memorization. Conducting from memory thing is also very personal. It's like I have to feel there's a special connection, even if it were a piece that I was had memorized but was not something like there's something more about that to me, conducting from memory. But there's a point where having the score actually detracts from my ability to inspire and evoke. And and when I feel that I've reached that point with the score, that's usually when I take away the score. Is when I feel that now I'm at a point where I know this well enough to help everyone, and to be at a place where this is no longer, it's more in the way than helping communicate. As far as markings, I mark scores with pencil, with regular number 2, and I am a big marker overall. My scores are, especially scores that I've had and performed multiple times. Any Beethoven or Brahms symphony, for example, are archaeological sites of layers of interpretation, analysis, and anecdotes, and that's why I write it all in pencil so that I can rate. Many conductors, I've met some conductors who have color schemes and these things, and I don't do that for one, because of how much I do write, and also because I found that as I've become better at studying scores and reading scores more quickly, I found that it helps me focus on the actual notes better rather than reading a color or reacting to a color. I want to react to the actual notes that are written there. And so I found that pencil without colors helps me connect with, here are the notes. This is what it is.
For those who haven't had a chance to listen to a new series on, still part of the podcast, it's called The Recap. It's with UK-based conductors George Jackson. We talk about all kinds of various different topics. And one thing that came up just recently on the latest episode is the iPads. Do you use an iPad ever to conduct? And if you do, any fun experiences, any crazy moments that failed?
I don't. I love the iPad. The idea of using an iPad with scores, and I don't have one currently. I don't use one for conducting, but it's very attractive. The idea of it is very attractive to me. However, I suppose I'm a bit of a traditionalist that I think there's something about when I'm actually there with an orchestra that having paper and this physical object, you know, even though I'm just talked about how I do conduct from memory, at times there's this idea of putting the score first and having this object that is material that has pages is for this, you know, music of ours that, you know, is a written tradition. I find it to be, I find that in most cases, I feel that it helps vaguely with an atmosphere, if that makes sense. That there's an atmosphere of magic making from a something you can touch. I think that my string quartet, for example, uses iPads, and so we use the foot pedals, and we're gigging and we're playing weddings and corporate events and these things, and it's great for that because you don't deal with the page turning. I'm a violinist, so I don't want to have to like stop like in a complex piece to just turn the page or even worry about it. So I'm a big fan of iPads, musicians using iPads, and I would actually be fine, I think, with the orchestra if there was an orchestra that wanted the players to all use iPads and a foot pedal for page turning. I think that's great.
Yeah.
And I think actually for study purposes, one day I might get someone, a student of mine, to like scan all my scores into an iPad, and then when I'm traveling, I think that would be good, like for studying. So then my suitcase, instead of weighing, 60 pounds, just an iPad. And then I think what I would do is I would just bring the scores that I'm conducting that week with me, along with the iPad to reference things. Yeah, it's very interesting. I've definitely seen a close friend of mine uses an iPad as a conductor, and with some of these more curmudgeonly older musicians, I've seen some bad attitudes and reactions to him using that iPad, which I think were sad, but I actually understand how they felt, like something about this very, very traditional thing, and you're going to bring this fancy object.
Yeah.
Fine.
And I do have a friend who also uses an iPad, and he was, I don't know if one of the first, but years ago, he started using an iPad, and I think there weren't even good enough programs to even have you mark them and all that. But he's one of these people, and I'm always inspired by people like this who are just ready to get to that next thing. Even if it's new, they're like, I'm just going to take a chance. I'm going to do it. That's really impressive. And I still use a score. I still use, actual scores, not an iPad. So maybe one day I'll take the risk and go for it. The things that come to mind are, how about if the program fails? How about if it's like there's a lag or something? And how about if the battery dies? I don't know. There's so many things that come to mind.
Or getting to a specific page, like in a rehearsal. Then it's like swipe, like getting to that, like getting to the page that you have to get to is interesting. But when you think about think about Karajan in Berlin Philharmonic, how he was famous for acknowledging and bringing in new technologies. You know,
Mhm.
he embraced the CD, he embraced video, he had the hall designed for video, which is part of why they have such an amazing digital concert hall now. Is that was Karyan's vision of
Yeah.
embracing technology. So
Yeah.
I definitely think that there's something to be said about embracing the benefits of anything we can have. I bet Karyan would use an iPad.
That's
I
awesome.
bet he would.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the current situation with pandemic and everything happening around the world. So much disaster and just terrible things. Not just in this country in America, but we talked before we got on. We talked about Lebanon, Armenia. All over the world, things are happening. Specific to pandemic and specific to this country, when things are better and well enough for people to play music and be together. What do you think are some positives that are going to come out of this time that not many people played music together? It wasn't done the same way, and also some positives and also some negatives that will be unfortunately impacting the musical world. What are some of your thoughts, positives and negatives of the current situation and post this situation?
Yes. Thanks for the question. I really am grateful in a lot of ways to be where I am now and to have a chance, like I said, to read things that I never probably would have read in their entirety, and to study and to work on my piano skills, which are abysmal, but now they're a little better because I've had a few months of focused effort. Um, so I think one of the better things that's going to come out of all this is that for for those musicians who survive, you're going to see an outpouring of not just more releases and more recordings and things because of the the way that the musical landscape has utterly changed in the last months, but also because they're actually going to be playing better, those that survive for the most part. And that is then brings the negative part of this is that I think there are many musicians who won't, and I mean that both from a standpoint that people are dying and have died, people in our field of the virus, and also I'm worried about many thousands of artists who simply will not be able to create art after this because they do not have the the funding and money and support to get through these many months without stopping what they're doing and taking other jobs.
Mm.
And I think it's extremely important that at a national level we pass legislation that supports and funds programs for artists
Mm.
of all kinds to stay afloat and to offer a hand to people. And it's important that we do this on the state and local level as well, because there are many thousands of beautiful artists that will, I fear, not be able to make art after this. If this goes as I expect it will on for another year or so, you're going to have people who that year of not being able to play and practice at the level, because you're working 40 hours a week at a grocery store, or 60 hours a week, online doing translations or whatever, transcriptions, which, I think that's going to be devastating for many musicians.
Mm.
So I would ask anyone listening to this to support actively, legislative uh, legislative action to send funding and money to arts organizations and individual musicians.
Thanks, Evan. You've had an amazing career and you've put a really nice, comfortable career for yourself. And I want to congratulate you for a new position that you just got as well. But for younger musicians, and you're a young musician, but for younger musicians than you who are just out of college, they're 22, they're trying to put a career together. And as you know, it's not that easy. Based on all the things that you've done, which is a tremendous list of many things that you've done, what are some recommendations? What are some suggestions, advice to young musicians who are trying to put a career together and are struggling?
Yeah, the first thing I would say for the very youngest, musicians is to be be open and say yes to all different kinds of music. When I was a teenager, I had strong and ill-advised opinions about what music was good and what music wasn't, and that led me to close myself off to whole categories of experiences that would have made me a better musician, and that actually I think hindered my development at that time. So I would say to say yes to all the weirdest and most unexpected things that someone might ask you to participate in or to do. That was something when I was growing up that was difficult for me, because I had a lot of preconceived notions about what a music career or a music path was.
Yeah.
So that's for example, recently I had the opportunity to be in an immersive theater production where I was an individual actor and a musician in the house band in this sprawling nightclub performance with multiple rooms of action happening at the same time, and just this absolutely wonderful project, called Pansy Craze in Syracuse. And that would never have happened for me if I hadn't been open to the possibility and have said yes. There was a whole string of things I said yes to get that gig that was very actually transformational for me. It didn't pay a lot, but it was incredible. And and I had to say yes to a bar owner asking me to play at an open mic, which is something classical musicians never do.
Yeah.
But he was a friend, and you know what? I said yes. So about a year and a half ago, I rolled up after my string quartet gig, I rolled up to a bar. It was about 11, and I played tangos because I have an affinity for Argentine tango music. And after that, the director of this show just came immediately up to me and recruited me for this project, which is never happens like that in classical music. It was out of a movie. But if I hadn't said yes to help out my friend and play on this open mic, none of that other stuff would have happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're able to, you don't want to stretch yourself too thin, right? But when you're able to, just say yes to stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's great advice. Evan, so many things that you're doing in music. Is there time for hobbies and other things and passions that you're just working on that are non-musical?
Not a lot. But I'll say one. There's my partner has recently inspired more of an interest in plants and in house plants and stuff. So I'm very slowly learning about growing things, and that's been another extremely fortunate thing about the timing of when the pandemic started, is that it was approaching spring and that we had a chance to think about planting things or buying things. I don't have very much going on in my own space, but it has been lovely to think about adding more green to my life.
You mentioned the music and how you wish you had more opportunities to listen to all these other experiences and different types of music early on. Well, in the recent years, what are some genres or artists that you came across that are not in your genre? You're like, wow, this is amazing. I wish I knew about this 10, 15 years ago. Any artists that come to mind, or specific genres maybe?
Yeah, so I always was kind of liked rap music and hip hop, but I was still weirdly closed off to certain things and certain artists. And frankly, Kanye West is really interesting and wild person, but really interesting in a lot of ways. And I I listened to some albums from about 5 or 6 years ago that I think are really interesting, and inspiring. There's been tango music has been a relatively new discovery for me. I had the opportunity to join a guitarist who was connected to the local social dance scene, and now for the past three-ish years, I've been playing Argentine tango for dancers. Which has been just a wonderful, another immersive kind of experience. So there's things like that. Also, I've through the influence of the podcast Triloquy. You may be familiar with Garrett's podcast. And my reading on Florence Price and what was going on in Little Rock, Arkansas in the 1930s and in Chicago in the 1930s. I've recently opened up to the idea of gospel music and spirituals as being a classical tradition, and as having this lengthy multi-genre history of quite serious music, quite serious composed music. So I'm just barely in the door with that area of music, but that's something recent.
Wow. That's awesome. One question that's come up many times on this podcast, and it's sort of become the standard question. And for those who are listening, they know what's coming. A life-changing moment, a personal life-changing moment, and a professional life-changing moment, if you're willing to share with us.
Yeah, that's something I struggle sometimes to line up, my life in terms of, what year I did this or that, or what the moment was. There was a moment in the forests of Maine at a famous program called Madonic for conducting, where, and this would be the professional moment where I felt that what I was doing with my body and my arms and with my person, my being, who I was being in that moment, really connected with what the music needed. And I suppose this connects to the idea of plants and green things, being in a forest, being connecting to nature, and thinking about how the music we make, in a lot, not every case, but in many cases, has connections to motions and physicalities and growth in nature. That was a special transformation for me. I suppose I'll have to pass on the next one. I'm not sure yet about the person.
Don't worry. I wanted to know another thing I've been wanting to know, especially after this pandemic, is what's one piece or a composer or maybe a collaboration that's in the back of your mind? You're like, I really wish I had the opportunity to conduct this piece. And if things are better, if things open up, I can't wait to jump on this thing and do it.
Yeah. I want to shout out my friend and ultra soprano, Emily Thorner. Ultra soprano Emily Thorner is this just remarkable contemporary vocal artist with the most expressive and agile and high coloratura voice. And there are a number of projects I'd like to do with her. Music of Ligeti, Mysteries of the Macabre, is a piece that I've been in love with, since I first heard of Ligeti, when I was probably 15. I love music by Unsuk Chin, and I would love to have a project with an ensemble to do pieces like the Gugulong street scenes or the acrostic wordplay. Unsuk Chin's music is just revels in complexity and puzzles and evokes a lot of happiness for me. And I haven't been able to play her music yet. So,
wow, That's beautiful. Anything else you want to add before we end today?
I'm so grateful, Tigran, for us to be together. And I'm just hoping that everyone stays very safe and keeps music in their heart. You know, I think it's really important that we have the opportunity to be together and that our souls can connect even when we can't, you know, be physically with each other all the time. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here, and I hope it won't be too long before we meet in person. It's been a while already. So have a beautiful day. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Off the Podium. If you enjoyed this episode, please comment, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next episode.